Now, for the purpose of this discussion, let's consider another way we can test out words, and that is to pay attention to what the words mean. Remember, we talked about media reports and how these are very often carefully worded to avoid a lawsuit. So suppose a report indicates that someone has been charged with a crime or that he's being investigated. All right, you have two words, charged and investigated. It doesn't mean he's guilty. Or suppose that someone is convicted and put in jail. Well, that would apply to our young brothers in Korea, wouldn't it? They were convicted and jailed. And what was their crime? They refused to kill someone. Did they do anything wrong? Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God. So, brothers, we really have to think about these things. We may read that a person or an organization was sued and then settled out of court. Does settling out of court mean that they were guilty? Not necessarily. Now, in this country and others, court cases are often handled by a jury. Now, who are on the jury? Ordinary citizens with no legal training. But not only that, these ordinary citizens don't always have access to all the facts because the judge and lawyers decide which facts will be shared with the jury. So it's unlikely that the whole truth will ever come out in court. Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court. Now, sometimes attorneys deliberately withhold information that would be prejudicial to their clients. And in addition, the juries have prejudices like everyone else, and some of them just can't set their prejudices aside.
What we've just heard is arguably the most damning video material featuring a governing body member maybe ever. This is disgusting rhetoric. Again, I hardly know where to begin, but what I will do is something that's drastically different from what David Splane is doing. I'm going to dignify my audience, and rather than speaking to them like children, rather than speaking in vague terms and just expecting my audience to play some game of guess what's on my mind, which is what David Splane always seems to do, I'm going to dignify my audience and just say it like it is. This man is speaking about child sexual abuse lawsuits. That's what he's talking about. And nowhere is he saying child sexual abuse lawsuits. He's just trying to soften up his audience. He's just trying to manipulate his audience into thinking that when they read something in the newspapers or watch something on the news about Jehovah's Witnesses being involved in child abuse litigation, or settling a child abuse lawsuit, or a Jehovah's Witness being convicted of child sex abuse, they're supposed to think of it as not being such a big deal. That's what this is all about. Again, I'm doing what David Splane can't be bothered to do or doesn't want to do. I'm telling it like it is. This is what he's talking about. And how shameful. What has this organization become? We're at the point where Jehovah's Witness leaders are basically demeaning the entire concept of criminality. That's what this is about. And he can try and work in that stuff about political neutrality and the brothers in Korea. What was it he said?
Or suppose that someone is convicted and put in jail. Well, that would apply to our young brothers in Korea, wouldn't it? They were convicted and jailed. And what was their crime? They refused to kill someone.
He's literally trying to draw a comparison between young Jehovah's Witness men jailed in Korea for conscientious objection and people being jailed over child abuse. Obviously, they are completely different things, but we can see where he's going with this. Again, he's manipulating his audience with the basic argument of we can't trust the courts, we can't trust the judicial system, we should view with suspicion whenever Jehovah's Witnesses are arrested for anything. That's his basic argument, to the point where he goes on to say,
did they do anything wrong? Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God.
So it doesn't matter, apparently, if someone's a convicted criminal, convicted by a court of law of doing a crime, of committing, of perpetrating a heinous act against another human being. It doesn't matter if a court of law has found a person guilty of committing crime. What matters is what God thinks. And I think we can all see what's happening here. I think David Splane is trying to preempt not just reports where Jehovah's Witness elders perhaps are jailed over child abuse. I think he's laying the groundwork for his own arrest, for the arrest of the governing body at some future point, because what they are doing is criminal, at least as far as I'm concerned. I don't know where the law stands on the industrial scale cover-up of child abuse on a database with thousands of names of predators that isn't being handed over to the police. But if that's not criminal now, it sure as hell will be in the future. And so it's conceivable that in our lifetime, David Splane and his colleagues will end up behind bars. I think that that's what should happen now. I think that's how serious this is. And I think David Splane is insecure about this prospect. So he's conditioning the Jehovah's Witness audience with an argument, with a pre-made argument of pay no mind to this. Just because you're seeing Tony Morris, David Splane, Stephen Lett behind bars with the rest of them doesn't mean they actually did something wrong. What matters is how God sees things. And when you get to that point with a religion, when you get to the point where religious leaders are making excuses for crime, are suggesting that crime isn't really such a big deal, and we should pay no mind under certain circumstances if someone is criminally convicted, you know you need to get out. And I'm speaking now to Jehovah's Witnesses who might be watching this. Come on, how do you defend this? How do you defend a religion that is now basically making it okay to commit crime under certain circumstances? This footage will age like milk. It will follow David Splane around to his dying breath. I'm certainly going to do everything I can to make sure it follows him around to his dying breath. You can be sure that what we've just seen now, this clip that we've just been examining, will be played again and again and again in documentaries that are dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses and the wide-scale cover-up of child sexual abuse, because it displays openly at a glance the contempt this organization has for the well-being of others, the contempt the leaders have for the very concept of being held accountable by law. And one more thing before we move on. I hope you caught the part where there was this Freudian slip by David Splane where he says,
so it's unlikely that the whole truth will ever come out in court. Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court.
Actually, neither side probably wants the whole truth to come out in court. Isn't that interesting? Neither side. Again, we're talking, I know he doesn't make this clear because he's trying to trick people. He's trying to deliberately muddy the waters and make this as vague as possible. But we're talking here about child sexual abuse litigation. We're talking about lawsuits surrounding the abuse of children and how that abuse has been handled or mishandled. Lawsuits that this organization that David Splane represents or leads is routinely getting caught up in. And here he's basically admitting neither side wants the truth to come out, meaning we don't want the truth to come out either.
I'll tell you an actual experience. Some time ago, a lawyer told me about a case he had. That was a case of medical malpractice by a doctor. There was a jury, and at trial, the doctor was clearly shown to be in the wrong, but the jury didn't give the patient a penny. The lawyer was confused, so after the trial, he approached two of the jurors and asked, "If you don't mind, tell me which part of the testimony you didn't believe." The jurors replied, "Oh, we didn't get that far. The doctor was cute, and we didn't want him to have to pay anything." With deep thinkers like that, no wonder many lawyers try to settle their cases rather than bring them to a jury. But someone will say, "No, I don't believe in settling out of court. I believe in justice and truth." So that brings up the question, is it wrong to settle a matter before it goes to trial? Or is it scriptural? Let's let Jesus answer that question. Turn to Matthew chapter 5, verses 25 and 26. Interesting that Jesus should mention this, with all the important things that Jesus taught. Matthew chapter 5, verses 25 and 26. Be quick to settle matters with your legal opponent while you are with him on the way there, so that somehow the opponent may not turn you over to the judge, and the judge to the court attendant, and you get thrown into prison. I say to you for a fact, you will certainly not come out of there until you have paid over your last small coin. Now, this is interesting. Think about the Mosaic Law. Was there any provision in the Mosaic Law to throw someone in jail if he couldn't pay a debt? That wasn't the way. If he couldn't pay, he'd have to work it off, or a family member would have to work it off. So when Jesus talks about prison and a judge, he's obviously referring to what a Gentile judge would do. Now, you couldn't necessarily expect justice from him. Why might he rule against our brother? Well, maybe he got paid under the table by the other party. Or maybe he was prejudiced against the race or the religion of the other party. Now notice, Jesus didn't say that the man should settle only if he was guilty. So, brothers, let's not be naive. Don't believe everything you read. Just because an article is called a news report doesn't make it true. And an editorial is someone's opinion, and that someone may be wrong. And TV producers may have their own agenda, prejudice, and viewpoint.
Of course, David Splane doesn't have his own agenda, prejudice, and viewpoint. David Splane is totally unbiased in all of this. As one of the leaders of an organization that is routinely having to fend off litigation over child abuse lawsuits. And isn't it interesting? He's still saying nothing at all about child abuse. He's still failing to dignify his audience by making everything so vague and non-specific. All he's really doing here is, again, demeaning the entire concept of a court of law of trying a civil or criminal lawsuit. And second of all, he's quite clearly trying to coerce Jehovah's Witnesses into thinking that there's nothing untoward whatsoever when it comes to settling cases out of court, which, again, the organization is doing in case after case after case. David Splane apparently digging out a verse that excuses this, and then going on to say, of course, just because we settle doesn't mean we're guilty.
Now notice, Jesus didn't say that the man should settle only if he was guilty.
Why would you settle if you're innocent? If you are the innocent party, and you are God's one and only true organization on earth, with a reputation to protect, and you're on the receiving end of litigation that is unfair and unjust, and you have dedicated funds to be thinking about, money that's been donated for the purpose of furthering the good news. Caleb and Sophia's ice cream money we're talking about here. You need to spend this wisely. And someone tries suing the organization unfairly, it would be wrong to settle. Of course you should fight. Of course you should try and get justice and get the case thrown out or overcome or prevail in some way so that you don't have to give over a single penny of dedicated funds, or you pay the bare minimum. Settling, of course, implies guilt. You're only going to settle, you're only going to throw money, potentially millions, at a child abuse survivor if they have a point, if they have a case against the organization. And that's what we've been seeing in case after case. I won't go into them all here. There's plenty of material like that if you do the digging online, either on JW Watch or on the Lloyd Evans channel whenever we've done Watchtower in Focus or JW Watch episodes. Heck, the media, just type in Jehovah's Witnesses child abuse cases, child abuse lawsuits, and see what comes up. And you will see that time and time again, this is an organization that tries to get cases buried the minute it becomes obvious that they are going to lose. And the reason that they're going to lose is not because the jury is biased, not because there's some inherent flaw in the legal system. It's because this is an organization that is failing children and they are being found out.